It began not as a kick, but as a scratch. A faint but sharp drag of something chitinous against the inside of my own skin. I was 4 months pregnant, lying on the sofa with a book resting on the gentle swell of my belly. And the sensation was so alien, so precise, that my breath hitched. It was not the fluttering quickening the pamphlets described, not the butterfly wings or gas bubbles that other mothers spoke of. It was a deliberate, single scrape, like a fingernail drawn slowly across a taut drum. Then it was gone. "Leo," I said, my voice a little tight. My husband looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed in concentration that softened when he saw my face. "Everything okay, Ilara?" "The baby, I think it just moved." His face split into a wide, beautiful grin. "Really? Already? What did it feel like?" How could I describe it? Strange, I managed, just sharp. "A little footballer in there, maybe," he chuckled, coming over to place a warm hand on my stomach. "Come on, little one, do it again for your dad." There was nothing. The deep, warm stillness of my own body was all I felt under his palm. The moment passed, and I let him convince me it was a strange muscle spasm, a nerve ending firing off in a new and interesting way. Pregnancy, after all, was a landscape of bizarre and novel sensations. I was a sculptor. I understood the body, the elegant mechanics of bone and muscle. But this was different. This was my own body becoming a foreign country. And I was merely its anxious, unprepared tourist. The scratching did not return for 2 weeks. I had almost forgotten it, filing it away in the cabinet of first trimester oddities. Then, one night, as I was drifting off to sleep, it came again. This time, it was a series of quick, frantic taps, like a trapped bird pecking against glass. They were too fast, too light, too numerous to be the dull thud of a developing foot or fist. I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs. It felt like it was happening right beneath the surface, a frantic communication I couldn't decipher. I gently prodded the spot with my finger, and the tapping stopped instantly, a sudden, unnerving silence. I started to catalog the movements, a secret ledger of dread. There was the scratching, there was the frantic tapping. And then, a month later, came the rolling. Again, the books had prepared me for a version of this, the baby turning over, a slow, heavy shift of weight. What I felt was not that, it was a sinuous, coiling motion. A fluid ripple that seemed to go on for too long, traversing the entire width of my abdomen in a slick, unbroken wave. It felt impossibly long, impossibly flexible, like a snake in a jar. At my 5-month checkup, I tried to explain it to dear Albright. She was a kind woman with tired eyes who had delivered half the children in town. I watched her face for any flicker of recognition as I described the sensations. "The movements feel complex," I said, stumbling over the words, already feeling foolish, not like a single kick. More like, more than one thing at once. She gave me a patient smile and patted my hand. "Ilara, fetal movement can feel very strange, especially the first time around. The baby is floating in amniotic fluid, and its movements can be distorted. Sometimes you'll feel an elbow and a knee at the same time, and your brain interprets it as something more complicated. It's perfectly normal to be a little anxious." Her words were a bomb of reason. Of course, distorted, my brain was misinterpreting it. The ultrasound was scheduled for the following week. That would show me. It would show me the single, perfect, 10-fingered, 10-toed baby. And this private horror would evaporate under the cool light of medical science. Leo held my hand as the sonographer, a young woman named Chloe, squirted the cold gel onto my belly. The monochrome world of my own interior swam into view on the screen above. And there it was, a tiny, perfect spine, a skull, round and pale as a pearl. The rhythmic, pulsing flicker of a heartbeat. "See," Leo whispered, squeezing my hand. "Perfect." Chloe clicked and measured, her expression neutral. "Heart rate is 150, right on track. Size is perfect for 21 weeks. Everything looks great." I watched the screen, desperate to reconcile the image with the feelings. I saw a tiny hand float up near her face. I saw the curve of a leg. It all looked so normal. For a moment, relief washed over me so completely that I felt lightheaded. I was wrong. It was all in my head. Then, as Chloe was moving the probe over to my right side, I saw it. For less than a second, the image seemed to warp. Behind the clear, sharp outline of the fetus, the grainy static of the ultrasound coalesced. It was a flicker, a momentary shadow, a ghost in the machine. But in that instant, I saw a shape that did not belong. It was a dense, overlapping lattice of thin, branching lines. Like a web of tangled branches or the legs of a spider, impossibly dense and complex. It was there, and then it was gone, dissolved back into meaningless gray noise as Chloe adjusted the angle. "What was that?" I gasped, my voice thin. "What was what, hon?" Chloe asked, still focused on her measurements. "Just getting the femur length, see, textbook." I looked at Leo. He was still beaming at the image of our child. His face a mask of pure, uncomplicated joy. He hadn't seen it. My heart sank. I didn't mention it again. What could I say? That I'd seen a monster lurking behind my baby's ghost. They moved my file from obstetrics to psychiatry. The horror now had two faces, the one inside me and the one in my own mind. I began to doubt everything. Was the scratching just dry skin? Was the coiling just my own intestines, displaced and protesting? Was the shadow on the screen just an artifact, a trick of the light? I clung to these rationalizations like a drowning woman to a splintered plank. But the anomaly was evolving. It was no longer content with internal sensations. It started happening in the bath. I would lie back in the warm water and watch my stomach. The movements were visible now, small twitches and larger lumps that would rise and fall. Leo loved to watch. "Look at him go," he'd say. Tracing the path of a lump he assumed was a foot. But I knew better. I would see a sharp, angular point press against my skin, too sharp for a knee, too pointed for an elbow. It looked like the tip of a claw. A jointed knuckle from a limb that could bend in ways a human limb could not. The moment I'd touch it, it would retract. One evening, I was lying on the bed, reading. A powerful, undulating movement rolled across my belly, and I saw it. For a brief, shocking moment, a shape was pressed so firmly against the taut skin that it was clear as a fossil in stone. It was a handprint, but it was wrong. There was a thumb, and beside it, not 4 fingers, but 6. They were long, slender, and unnaturally jointed, splayed out in a starburst before melting back into the curve on my belly. I stared, my blood running cold. It wasn't a distortion. It wasn't my imagination. I had counted them. I stopped talking to Leo about it. The one time I tried to explain the 6-finger handprint, his face clouded with a deep, pitying concern that hurt more than any disbelief. He suggested I talk to Dear, Albright, about prenatal anxiety again. He started making me herbal tea. He would rub my back and tell me how strong I was, how it was almost over. He was trying to soothe a frightened animal. And I was, but the danger he couldn't see was the one that was real. The isolation was a physical presence, a cold wall between us. My art became my only confidant. Our spare room, my studio, was my sanctuary. I had been working on a series before the pregnancy, abstract figures in bronze, celebrating the human form. Now, I couldn't touch them. I turned to clay, my hands plunging into the wet, gray earth of it. I didn't think, I just worked. What emerged from my hands horrified and fascinated me. I sculpted tangled masses of limbs. Forms that were all joints and angles. Things with too many legs and no torso. Heads that flowered into grasping claws. They were anatomically impossible, biomechanically nightmarish. Leo once came into the studio and stopped dead. He stared at the wet, gray monstrosities covering every surface. "Ilera, what is this?" he asked, his voice strained. "It's what I feel," I whispered, not looking at him. My hands were caked in clay, and I was smoothing a long, chitinous-looking leg on a new creation. He left without another word. That night, I heard him on the phone, talking quietly to my mother-in-law. I caught phrases. Not herself, obsessive, scared for her. The sounds started in the 7th month. The house we lived in was an old Victorian inherited from my maternal grandmother. A place of deep shadows and drafts that sighed. I had always loved its character. Now it felt malevolent. In the dead of night, when the old house was groaning around me, I would hear it. A faint, dry, chittering sound. I would sit bolt upright, straining to locate it. It wasn't the house settling, it wasn't the pipes. The sound was close, terribly close. One night, I pressed my ear to my own belly. And I heard it, faint but unmistakable, through the gurgle and rush of my own body. A dry, papery, clicking sound like locusts rubbing their legs together. My descent became a spiral. I stopped sleeping. I would sit in the dark, my hands wrapped around my enormous belly, feeling the constant, complex motion within. It was no longer a single creature moving, it felt like a nest. A writhing, restless mass of limbs, all shifting and jostling for space. The pressure was immense. My skin felt thin as parchment, stretched to its absolute limit over this teeming secret. I started to look for answers not in medicine, but in history, my history. My mother had died when I was a teenager, a sudden aneurysm. I had few memories of her being ill. She was a quiet, nervous woman, prone to long silences and with a habit of rubbing her hands together. A motion I now recalled as oddly fluid, her fingers seeming to bend too far back. My grandmother, whom the house had belonged to, was a woman my mother rarely spoke of. She had died in a psychiatric institution. The family story was that she had suffered from hysteria after the birth of my mother. In the dusty attic, amidst boxes of my grandmother's belongings, I found it. A small, leather-bound diary. Her handwriting was a spidery, elegant script that grew more frantic and disjointed as the pages turned. Most of it was mundane, but then I found the entries from her pregnancy. October 12th, the doctor says the feeling is the babe's turning. But a babe does not have so many corners, it does not scratch from within. My breath caught in my throat, I read on, my hands trembling. November 3rd, I saw its mark upon my skin today, a star with too many points. Arthur says I am unwell, that my mind creates phantoms. But the phantom left a print. December 19th, the kicking never ceases, it is a legion. I feel it crowding my own lungs, my own heart. It feels as though I am not one soul in this body, but two. No, not two, one in a swarm. The final entry was dated the day before she was committed. The child will be born soon, but I am not afraid of the child. I am afraid of the hunger that awakens with it. It has been quiet for a generation, dormant in my blood. But the babe's life has called to it, a feast laid in its own cradle. It is not the babe that kicks, it is the other. The heirloom. The word was a key, unlocking a door in my mind to a room I never knew existed. I stumbled back from the box, a low moan escaping my lips. The coiling, scratching, writhing thing inside me wasn't the baby. It was something else. Something that had been there all along, dormant in my blood, in my mother's blood, in my grandmother's blood. The pregnancy hadn't created a monster, it had awakened one. This new knowledge did not bring peace. It brought a terrifying clarity. The line between reality and horror hadn't blurred, it had sharpened into a razor's edge. I was not losing my mind. I was a vessel for two occupants, my child, and the parasite that my own family had passed down like a cursed inheritance. The sculptures in my studio weren't fever dreams, they were portraits. The shadow on the ultrasound wasn't a glitch, it was a glimpse of the passenger. I walked downstairs, my hand on my belly, feeling the constant, roiling motion. It felt different now, not just alien, but proprietary. It wasn't a guest, it was the original tenant, furious at the intruder. My baby, my poor, innocent baby was sharing its first home with a predator. The climax arrived on a Tuesday night. I was 9 months along, a great, swollen whale of a woman, and I could barely move. Leo was watching me, his face a constant mask of worry. He had scheduled an appointment with a therapist for me the next day. He thought I was a danger to myself, he had no idea. I was standing in the kitchen, drinking a glass of water, when a wave of pain so intense it stole my breath buckled my knees. It wasn't a contraction, it was a sharp, searing agony on my right side. I cried out, clutching myself. Leo rushed to my side. Elera, what is it? Is it time? I couldn't answer, I just stared down at my stomach. The fabric of my nightgown was tinted, pushed out by a shape so sharp, so defined, that it was impossible to misinterpret. It wasn't a lump, it was a limb, a long, segmented limb, bent at a severe, insect-like angle. It pushed upward, straining against my skin, the sharp point of its final joint creating a pale, bloodless peak. It was as clear and real as the kitchen table. The glass of water shattered on the floor, the terrified face of my husband. Leo saw it, his denial, the wall of rationalizations he had built around me, crumbled into dust. The color drained from his face, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at the impossibly sharp, unnaturally jointed thing deforming my body from the inside. It stayed there for a long, torturous moment, a grotesque sculpture of flesh and bone, before slowly, deliberately, retracting back into the depths of me. My God, he whispered, his voice shaking, Elera, what is in you? I started to laugh, it was a wild, broken sound. Not what, I corrected him, the terrible truth finally spilling out, who is in my family? From that moment on, he was terrified of me. He still brought me food, still spoke to me in hushed tones, but he wouldn't touch me. He slept on the sofa. When he looked at my belly, he wasn't looking at his child anymore. He was looking at the cage. He still brought me food, still spoke to me in hushed tones, but he wouldn't touch me. He slept on the sofa. When he looked at my belly, he wasn't looking at his child anymore. He was looking at the cage. The days leading to my due date were an eternity of surreal calm. The thing inside was quieter now, as if gathering its strength. There were only occasional, slow, deliberate movements, a patient uncoiling. I spent the time in the attic, reading my grandmother's diary again and again. She hadn't been mad, she had been a Cassandra, screaming the truth no one would believe. The heirloom was symbiotic, in a way. It slept for generations, passed from mother to daughter, a dormancy. Pregnancy was a catalyst, the warmth and sudden flood of life-giving resources a signal for it to awaken, to stretch its many limbs, to prepare, to feed, to propagate. I would look at my reflection in the dark windows of the old house. The pregnant woman staring back at me was a stranger. My own fingers seemed longer, my joints more pronounced. When I stretched my hand, I could almost feel the ghost of a sixth digit. Were these changes real, or just the shadow of my new awareness falling over my own form? I didn't know, I didn't care. All that mattered was the impending event. Tonight, it happened. The first true contraction gripped me, the deep, primal squeezing that was entirely different from the sharp pains of the heirloom. It was the baby, my son. He was ready. I felt a surge of fierce, protective love for him that was so pure it was painful. He was the only innocent in this. As the contraction subsided, I felt a different, corresponding movement. A tightening deep inside that was not my uterus, it was the other, the heirloom. It was bracing itself, its numerous limbs finding purchase against my ribs and spine. It was anchoring itself for the coming upheaval, for the opening. I stood up, my legs trembling, and leaned against the doorframe of the nursery Leo had so lovingly painted in shades of sky blue. He stood at the other end of the hall, his face pale, his phone in his hand, ready to call the ambulance. He looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible mixture of love and pure, undiluted horror. A warm gush of fluid broke over my feet, soaking the floorboards. My water, the baby was coming. But as the primal, biological wave of the first stage of labor washed through me, I felt something else. A second, drier, sharper kind of breaking deep within the tightening crucible of my womb, like 1,000 tiny eggs hatching all at once. And I knew, with a certainty that eclipsed all fear, that the birth of my son would not be an ending, but a beginning. The heirloom was awake, and it was hungry.